So I don't know if any of you have sat in the other seminars, but Fred and I, my name's Cameron, Fred and I are just going to take you through plot finding, a bit about design and a bit about planning as well. We've got quite a lot to squeeze in, so forgive us if we're talking quite quickly, but we want to get through as much as we can for you and give you everything hopefully you need to know. So plot finding, as I say, that's the first subject, followed by a bit on design, and then a bit about planning, which is where Fred will step in. Just to start with, a little bit of history about Scandia. Privately owned UK-based company, always been a UK-based limited company, started by a Swedish lady over 45 years ago. She actually only retired about 6 years ago. And she started the company specifically to help people realise their dream and build their own home, more so as self-build scenario back in those days. These days, obviously, we have main contractors who can help you do the build, or you can project manage yourselves, or indeed you could still self-build if you wanted to. We have our own factory now. We used to import the houses direct to site from Sweden back in the day. Now we have our own factory and have had for probably nearly 20 years actually. So now we are completely bespoke. We used to have standard designs off the shelf you could pick from. Now 90% of the work that we do is based around your brief to us about how you want this house, your dream house to be. We're focused solely on the self-build side of things, as I say, but because we have our factory, we do the odd small development or joint ventures with a client and maybe do two or three builds as opposed to just the individual ones. But that is our core business still, individual, specifically for you, the clients. So plot finding, probably the hardest bit as it stands at the moment, finding your building plot. Has anybody here got building plot at the moment? So a couple of you, which is a good start. Sorry if this is going to be boring, but I'll just go through this with everybody else. So there are several avenues you can explore to try and find building plots. The obvious one is to sign up with the local estate agents, potentially try and focus on just a county rather than spreading it out too wide. But yeah, sign up to the local agents. Don't hold your breath. You know, they tend to earmark their building plots for their friendly developers to sell the plot, you know, to them, and then obviously he will build the house and then they will sell the house as well. So they get a two-hit commission by going through developers. But if you can get friendly with them, that can work. Local auctions, obviously, obvious place to go to. Some of our customers have been successful with that. You may be bidding for the land or you may be bidding for a house to demolish and rebuild. Either way, you need to do your homework before you sign on the line. You're potentially going to be buying that plot or that house on the day. So make sure you know the background of what's being sold. Replacement dwellings. A lot of our customers now do this. Sometimes it's the only way to find the ideal plot in the location that you want. Demolition and rebuild speaks for itself. Advantages can be that you're going to have all your utility connections already on site. You might have a garage that you can retain and reuse. You might have landscaping, etc., etc. Downside is you're probably going to pay more for bricks and mortar as opposed to a virgin building plot that you're just going to knock down, and you've got demolition costs as well, and that could be anything from £8,000, £10,000 to £15,000. If the house you're demolishing happens to have asbestos in it, that could raise the cost slightly more as well, depending on the type of asbestos. If the house that you're buying looks like that, also just another word of caution, the council might consider that to be an abandoned property. If rates and bills haven't been paid on it for a number of years, they might not consider that to be a residential dwelling anymore, and as a replacement dwelling, that might be a difficult argument to make. It's rare, but it has happened. If you're lucky enough to have existing land that looks like that, it's highly unlikely they're going to let you build on it, to be honest. But if it's demolition and rebuild, yes, very likely. If it's land that's part of your garden, side garden, back garden, and it falls within the development boundary of the village, then there's every chance that parcels of land you can apply for planning or buy the plot and then apply for the planning. Land finding agencies, Plot Finder, some of you may have heard of. They have a never-ending huge stock of plots that seem to be available. But But you have to ask yourself the question, why haven't those plots been sold when everybody's after them, after plots these days? There's probably something not right with them, or they're just too expensive. Specific agencies that you can sign for, and just Google that, you'll come across some. You sign up to them, they're a bit like estate agents. You give them your brief, you give them the criteria, they will then go off and try and find you a number of plots that you can consider, and then if you go forward and purchase one of those plots, they take a commission and a payment then. They used to be really useful for expats moving back to the UK, and they would give them the job to find them a plot rather than trying to do it all themselves from afar. So they're quite good. Word of mouth, 50-50, but if you start a bit of networking, particularly in small local villages where everybody knows everybody's business, get to know the nosy postman, get to know the nosy landlord, all seem to know what's going on, and sometimes you can, be lucky and somebody might have heard about a piece of land that's sort of an old house that's got an unkept garden, that could come your way as well. And then local councils, this isn't one that everybody knows about necessarily. If you pinpoint the local council in the area that you're looking, or you go to their website via the planning portal, all councils have weekly lists of planning applications that have either been submitted or have been approved. With a bit of covert research, it's all in the public domain on the website, you can find out who the applicant or the agent is. You might be able to get hold of them before that planning approval or that piece of land goes forward out into the general market, and you might be able to negotiate a private purchase with them. And some of our customers have been successful with that as well. Bit of a laborious task. Some of the websites are clunkier, better than others, but it's worth doing, weekly if you can, and just keep at it. If and when you found your plot, you need to just make sure you investigate the planning history a little bit. If you're doing a demolition and rebuild, perhaps not so important, but if it's a virgin building plot that's got a planning approval on it, you want to check out what planning might have gone on in the past. If you're hoping to build a nice big 2-storey dwelling and you investigate the planning and find that several planning applications previously have been refused for a 2-storey dwelling, and then suddenly a bungalow is given an approval, the chances are they're only ever going to let you build a bungalow. So trying to go back again for a 2-storey, just wasting potentially time and effort. But that's where you would have a chat with the planners and just see things have changed. If things have changed, that may now let you do that. But as I say, important to have a look at the history, and also the local council's policies. There is the national planning policies that all the councils follow, but they also have their own, which are more distinct to certain things within their district. And Wealdon District Council, if you know it, is a prime example where Ashdown Forest has a big part to play in their decisions at the moment. They've got themselves into a bit of a mess, but we won't go there at the moment.
All intrigued now, aren't you?
Yeah. Watch this space. Watch the news. This is East Grinstead, map of East Grinstead with the out around the perimeter of the development boundary. Everything in green around the outside is open countryside. So it's unlikely to be able to build in there unless it's a demolition rebuild. The blue areas are areas that are designated areas that are now, back when this was produced, to be built on, and the other areas are for sort of commercial development or even more development further in the future. But just to focus on this little strip here, just as an example, this is the road from East Grinstead out to the A264 out to Tunbridge Wells, and all the people down here are the haves, and all the people out on the periphery here are the haves-nots. And if you go down there now, you'll see that lots of these people have sold their back gardens, houses have been built, developers have stepped in, pulled a driveway through, and it's just a massive extra housing all round down here. So they've done very well out of this, selling off all their back gardens. These people over here and down here are probably grinding their teeth, I would have thought, at what's gone on over the years. Flexible design. This is a picture of the house you're sitting in now in the Tudor style, but we just thought we'd show you this as an example of what you can simply, by changing the external finishes on a house, make a house look completely different. And this is potentially for a customer of mine up in Derbyshire, hence all the stonework that he's got to do up there and wants to do up there. With design, We have our own team of architectural technicians over the way there. During the week, there's usually 6 or 7 of them in there. Some of them are the more arty, creative type. Some of them are more the technically, structurally minded people. They tend to be the older individuals. The youngsters are doing the creative stuff. But we've got a really good mix of all abilities in there. And when you've found your plot and you want to sign up to Scandia, you don't need an architect. We do it all for you. We sit and discuss the brief and the budget and what we think the planners are going to let you do. We might start with some sketches just to set things in motion, and then that will go into our drawing office. They turn all of that into something a bit more definitive and presentable. Floor plans, elevations will come out to you. If we need to do 3D visuals, we can do those as well. So it's just steps going forward to get it how you want it, and then hopefully, ultimately, you will end up with the finished article, which is a resemblance really of where we started, with this. Some of our customers come to us already with the plot and armed with a set of drawings that have been approved, been drawn by an architect or somebody else. It's all been approved. They don't want to go back into planning to change anything because they can't face it. It's been a bumpy ride, or it's been a long process, so they're inclined just to build, if it's a nice house, what they've got planning for anyway. And again, this is just an example of architects' plans. They go into our drawing office, they redraw everything in the Scandia way of thinking and the specification and the timber frame, etc. And then you end up with, hopefully, what looks like the drawings that have been approved. Just as a quick flick through. We also offer a no-obligation site visit. So when you've found your building plot, or at least exchange or heading towards exchanging on it, one of us will come out to the site, meet you on site, have a chat about the plot and what sort of things you're hoping to do with it. We will also, at that early stage, have a view on, if there's any problems with the site or areas that you need to be and we need to be mindful of. So access onto the site for construction traffic, services. So if the services are on the boundary, in the verge, on the same side as the road as the plot is, that's nice and easy, relatively inexpensive to get the utilities into the site. If it just happens to be just across the road, then you might have to do road closures, traffic lights, suddenly your costs start to increase. And if you happen to be half a mile down the road just to get power in, you could be looking at tens of thousands of pounds. So it's just be mindful of that. Trees are sort of naturally forming obstacles on the site sometimes. Sometimes they need to be removed, sometimes they have preservation orders on, so they can't be removed. But, as long as we know they're there, and the council will know they're there, we might have to put root protection measures in. You might have to do pile foundations entirely or locally to the tree, just to make sure that they are protected. But we will advise you on that. Obviously, the trees will have an influence on your foundation depths potentially as well, depending on the proximity and the type of tree, and so on. Overhead cables, so perfect for your utility connections right on the site, but also a bit of a problem to get construction traffic onto the site. So it might be that they can be moved and put underground, or it might be that we have to sheathe the cables to make it safe, because ideally we don't want to electrocute the man who's driving the crane when you're building your property. Existing properties, as I say, I've touched on this. Some of our clients might have bought a house to live in it, applying for planning to build the new property to one side or the other. So you get the bonus of being able to live there whilst your new property is being built, as opposed to having to go to rented or stay with somebody else or caravan on site. Quite often, though, the planners will only let you build on a similar sort of footprint, so that's going to have to come down before the new house can go in. And as I said earlier, things like asbestos have to be separated out from the rest of the demolition these days, so there could be a bit of added cost there. But again, it's not a deal breaker, it's just knowing up front early what you're dealing with, that's all. Topography, now this is off the back of a topographical site survey, which 9 times out of 10 you will need for the planning application, and you would commission it then. That shows, and Fred's going to touch on this later, but that shows if there is an existing house there, where it is, where these surrounding properties are, ridge heights, site levels, boundaries and tree positions and so on. Sometimes, though, we might need that earlier on. We might need it at this early design stage prior to going into planning. If it's a tight site that you're building in between other properties, we need to know what space you've got. The heights of those properties is essential. And if it's a sloping site like that, again, to do good design for you, we need to know properly the levels of the site, if you're doing basements or split level designs, that sort of thing. So, that may or may not be necessary early on, but it will almost certainly be necessary prior to going into planning, which Fred is dying to talk to you about.
Thank you very much. Yes, so you've taken on board Cameron's fantastic advice. First question you might ask yourselves, do you need a planning consultant? So here at Scandia, we deal with a large majority of planning applications in-house, only in circumstances where it's particularly sensitive site, there's particular local policies that maybe enact. It may be beneficial to have a local consultant that knows the area, knows how the council works, and it might give you a slightly better chance of getting that approval. But yeah, more than 9 times out of 10, 90% of the time, we deal with all the applications in-house. So once you've made that decision, it comes up, it's on to the planning submission. So what exactly is, what goes into the planning application? What details do you need? Unfortunately, it's not a case of just drawing up a scheme that you think looks pretty, we think looks pretty, and hopefully the planner looks pretty, and then they approve that. There's a bit more information that's required to go into that. So starting off with your application form, so this is essentially details what you're proposing, all your site location details. It's essentially your bones of your application. So the planner will be able to look into that and know exactly what you're proposing. If there's anything knocking down, it'll be detailed in there. Location plan. So you've got to show the planner where you're proposing to build. So this will outline all of your land, all of the proposed land that's going to be developed on. Just a nice easy check back. The planning statement or design and access statement pretty much is a padded out version of the application form. So you're fluffing up your argument as to why your application should be approved, why you're doing it, what your proposed build is going to be, what you're doing it for, any materials, some nice coloured pictures if you've got them. Just creating a story so that you're trying to get the planner on board with your application. Next up is your existing and proposed site plan. So as Cameron mentioned, this can come in the form of a topographical survey. As you can see, the difference on these two is this shows your existing buildings, any outbuildings, locations of trees, all the existing driveways, and it makes it a lot easier to plot where your proposed building is going to go. And this is going to be quite essential for when you go on to actually building the house as well. So the ground workers will need this to be able to set out where the foundations are going, where your building's actually going on the site. If there are existing buildings on the site, you're going to need drawings of them. So quite often the planners will look at, if you're doing a knockdown rebuild, they'll look at the existing size, volumes and floor areas, and they'll equate that to what your allowed size and volume is. Typically there's a percentage, allowable percentage that a certain council will have. It differs from council to council. And then that will give you your area and volume, what you're allowed to play around with to produce your proposed schemes. So with the elevations in particular on contemporary houses, it quite often just brings it to life a bit more if you do them in colour or 3Ds, because contemporary houses can look a bit bland on a 2D plan. Just a bit of colour on there, shows the planner exactly what materials you're proposing to use or the colours of them. And just makes it a bit more interesting. Obviously, your floor plans and any sections that might be required of your proposed scheme. If you've got any hazards on the site, like this one here, you've got a stream that runs down the side of the site. The planners will want to see that in relation to where your proposed house is going to go. Make sure there's no issues, in this case, with flooding on the proposed location. It shows you that height of that in relation to the stream. In residential areas, they'll want to see how your new building relates to your immediate neighbours, so the ridge heights and the vernacular. So if you're in a street where every single house in there is Tudor, chances are they're not going to let you build a contemporary white box in there. You might have to match in the style of those existing houses. Landscape schemes becoming more and more common. Planners asking for this up front. So they'll want to see exactly where your paths and patios are going, any planting schemes you're proposing, any trees that are being removed or planted. They'll want to see details of all of that. And again, nice coloured plan. Just makes it very easy for everybody to see, avoiding confusion. Surveys. If you do have things like ponds, trees, any sort of intricacies on your site, the planners may ask for a survey that essentially backs this up.
Finally on there is SIL forms, Community Infrastructure Levy. So this has been introduced for 12-18 months now, and their planners are quite hot on it. So Community Infrastructure Levy is essentially a development tax. It's to stop big builders coming in, building 200 homes in a town, and then taking all the profit and moving off, and then they don't leave anything for the town, no infrastructure, anything like that. So it's essentially it goes in, it's supposed to go into improving roads, schools, doctor surgeries, which is good. If you're doing self-build, you get self-build exemptions, so you should not be paying any community infrastructure levy. But we'll touch on that in a couple of slides. So the planning process, once you've got all of your documentation together, it's then submitted to the council. They'll have somebody look at it, make sure they've got absolutely everything that they need, and then they'll issue you with a validation letter. So that validation letter will detail your determination date, which is typically 8 weeks after the validation. You'll also have your application number and details of the planning officer. So you use the application number to track your application online, see anything that comes in through the whole process. And the planning officer, that details of their phone number and email if you need to get hold of them at any point during the process. As soon as it's all validated, your application will be sent out to consultation. So your immediate neighbours will get a letter through the post with an outline of what you're proposing, and anybody that may have an interest in the land. So be it ecologist, the parish council, tree surveyor, heritage officers. Anybody that might have an interest, they'll get a letter for their comments. They've then got 21 days in which to write up their comments, get back to their planner, and after that date, the planner can start collating everything and hopefully writing up their report. So after that 21 days is up, it's a good time for me to start speaking to the planner. So hopefully they'll be quite amenable and they'll actually answer phone calls and emails. You're not always so lucky. But essentially they should have been collating all of these consultation documents, and if there's any comments from, say, one of the neighbours where you've got a bathroom window on the first floor that they think overlooks their building, might be a case of simply, okay, we'll show that as a frosted window, and then we eliminate that issue. So it's at this stage we can have a bit of negotiation, substitute plans, make small amendments that hopefully make the process go nice and smoothly. And then at the end of that 8 weeks, the planner doesn't turn around to you at the last minute and say, oh, by the way, I've looked at this and I need X. They've got all of it, but their information, they can do it all on time and issue your decision, which hopefully is all approved. And I can give you a call or send you this letter and you can tell me how brilliant I am, hopefully. And we can... How brilliant we are. Okay. And yes, we pop the champagne and everything's lovely and we can start moving on and actually imagine our house being built. Some instances, it might be a case of through the negotiation with the planner and they've advised us that they're thinking of refusing the application, so we should either accept the refusal or withdraw the application. It might be a case of the changes that they're after are too substantial to be dealt with as a substitution of plans. So in that instance, we'll withdraw the application, change over the scheme to however it needs to be doing. Sometimes the planners will give you quite good guidance, sometimes not. Redo the scheme, get everything ready to get back into the planners, and the application should be allocated to the same planning officer. So they'll already know the history of the application. They'll be able to see what your scheme previously was and what you've changed. So it should be a nice, smooth process. And then ultimately you can join the happy people that have got their applications approved. So once that approval has come through, you'll be listed with a few conditions on the approval letter. So These can be weird and wonderful, but there's a few standard ones, things that they'll want to see on almost every application. So the first one will be materials. No matter how many nice colourful elevations and 3D images you provide with the planners, they'll still want to see either photos or physical samples of the materials you're proposing externally, so they know what it's going to look like. It's particularly relevant in where you're in conservation areas, areas outside of natural beauty, in greenbelt, just because they want to know exactly what you're putting on there, so it's not going to be out of place. You're not going to go for a fluorescent pink external skin of your house, which I suppose is quite understand that. Tree protection. So if you've had to submit a tree report with your application, chances are there'll be a tree protection condition. In the conclusion of your report, it will say these trees on the site need to be provided with protection throughout the build. And guess what? In the plan approval, they're going to say that needs to be adhered to. So quite standard. Removing of PD rights. If you're building something that's quite a bit more substantial than existing conditions on site, whether it's a complete virgin plot and you're building something on there, or a knockdown rebuild, council will more than likely take away your permitted development rights. So this permitted development typically for extensions, outbuildings, garages. This doesn't mean to say that you can't do these, it just means you've got to go back through the planners to do it. Gives them a bit more control over, if they've allowed you a nice big house, they want to see exactly what you're proposing. If you want to build a nice 6-bay garage on there, they're going to want a bit of consultation on that before they approve that. And then finally, start within 3 years. So as soon as that approval is issued, you've got 3 years to start works on site. Doesn't mean you've got to finish in 3 years, just means you've got to break ground. Bit of trench work, so we have some customers where they're running out of time because they're busy schedules, trying to get everything lined up. Gets to maybe 2.5 years down the line, and they might just put in a bit of trench work and some foundations, and then you get that for this extant permission, then you get that for your lifetime. A customer around the corner here built from his permission was 1955, and he built that. That was interesting. And now here we're back, community infrastructure levy. It's quite a big issue because it can be quite a large chunk of money. Councils typically have their fee structure is based on it's price per square metre. So it can be, say, £150, and they'll use that on any additional floor space. So if you're knocking down, say, a 100 square metre house and building 150, that sill fee is calculated on 50 square metres. If you're building on a virgin plot, it's your whole floor area. So your assumption of liability, this is a form that has to be submitted with the planning application. You can submit a self-build exemption at that time as well. Typically, the SIL officer will write to you within a week of you getting your approval through to say you are liable for X amount of pounds. If you've done the self-build exemption with the plan application, it will come through as nil. And if not, you've got that opportunity to submit your self-build exemption form. One of the most important things that quite often gets forgotten about, dangerously, is the commencement notice. This has to be done up to 6 months before you start works on site. So it can be the week before, can be 5 months before. As long as that commencement notice is submitted, you've got your self-build exemption, it's all done. So the only condition on the SIL is that you have to live there for 3 years for that exemption to be in place. So if you move, say 2 years down the line, you'll probably be getting a letter in the post from the council to say you owe us this community infrastructure levy. It's I suppose not the most uplifting ending to the seminar, but it is very important because it can be quite a lot of money. We've had some near misses with customers, so it can be something to watch out for. But that is about it. Moving on.